Shalom. Today we're going to talk about kosher for Passover matzah and other stories. We're going to start with another story which you may have heard in a different context, but once you hear it in this context, you will see that it is a real Jewish story. So Joel and Rassis get married, and it's a good match, a good shidduch, and their mothers know each other and the fathers know each other, and everybody's very happy. She knows him since they were small children, and she's been waiting for this day. And so she's going to make the first Shabbos dinner, and she takes out a chicken, and of course it's Shabbos dinner. So she takes out the chicken and the knife, and she picks up the knife, and she's going to cut. And Joel says, "What are you doing?" And she says, "I'm cutting the tuchus off the chicken. You know, the backside of the chicken. Some people call it the Pope's nose." He says, "Why are you cutting the backside off the chicken?" She says, "It's not kosher." He said, "My mother never cut the backside off the chicken. I think it is kosher." She says, "Well, you know, it's our first Shabbos. I don't want any machloches. I don't want any arguments. I'm going to call my mother." "Okay," he says, "good. Hello, Mama." "Oh, Mama, how are you? It's so good to hear your voice. Everything is good at home with Joel?" Rossi says, "Yes, Mama, but I went to make the chicken. I was going to cut the tuchus off the chicken." And Joel says, "No, we can't eat it. It's kosher." And Mama says, No, it's not kosher. We always cut the backside off the chicken." And Rossi says, "But Joel's Mama never cut it." So Rossi's Mama thinks. She says, "Well, let me call my mother." So they call Grandma Beryl, and she asks her, and she says, "So, Mama, isn't it true that we always cut the backside off the chicken?" And Beryl says, "Yes, of course." And Rossi's Mama says, "Because it's not kosher, right?" And Beryl says, "Yes." Rossi's Mama says, "But Joel's mother never cut it, so we're having a little confusion." And Beryl says, "You know, I was the youngest child. I didn't get the best learning in my house. Let me call my older sister Sadie. She's in an old person's home, you know, in Yonkers. Maybe she would remember." So Beryl calls Gross Tante Sadie, her sister. She says, "Sadie, do you remember in the house Mama always cut the backside off the chicken? Isn't that right?" And Sadie says, "Yes, that's true. I remember." And Beryl says, "Sadie, it's not kosher, right?" And Sadie says, No, it's kosher." And Beryl says, "Then why do we cut the backside off the chicken?" And Sadie says, "Because if you don't cut the backside off the chicken, it doesn't fit in the pot." And so this is where we get a lot of our halacha, the things that we walk out as our understanding of Torah, from grandmothers, yes, and great grandmothers, and also from rabbis. So, what exactly is matzah, which is kosher for Passover? If you live in a smaller town, you may not have a great variety of matzahs to choose from. So, exactly in Exodus 13:7, it says, "Unleavened bread, this is matzah, shall be eaten 7 days, and there shall no leavened bread be seen with thee, neither shall there be leaven seen with thee in all thy quarters." So matzah is defined as unleavened bread, bread with no leavening, like yeast. So I made a survey locally, and I live in a medium-sized town, and there are Jews here. Maybe they're not very observant. And this is what I found in my grocery store. Strites. Strites is since forever, 100 years, they're making matzah for Jewish people. But in the lower left-hand corner, it says, "Not for Passover use." Let's look at the ingredients. Unbleached wheat flour and water. There's no leaven in that. How about Manischewitz? Of course, Manischewitz been making matzah forever. But we look down in the lower left-hand corner, and it says, "Not for Passover." Well, maybe there's something in the ingredients. Unbleached, unbromated wheat flour, water. Well, that's very strange. Finally, we find Yehuda matzah. And let me tell you, if you have an option to buy Yehuda matzah, it is the best tasting matzah. And it is, in the lower left-hand corner, kosher for Passover. What are the great ingredients? Unbleached wheat flour and water only. What is this? They all have the same ingredients, but some are kosher for Passover and some are not. What about the poor people that are gluten intolerant? Here's something: shibolim ot matzah. Looking down in the right hand corner, not for Passover use. Well, you know, let's see what the ingredients are. I had to go to the website to find the ingredients. Certified gluten-free whole grain oat flour, water, tapioca starch, potato flour, chickpea flour. It's got a bunch of ingredients. Maybe that's why it's not kosher for Passover. Yehuda also makes a gluten-free, but it clearly says not a replacement for matzah at the Seder. And again, we have a litany of ingredients: tapioca starch, water, potato starch, potato flakes, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Oh, but there is kosher for Passover gluten-free matzah. And now we come to an important word. It's shmura gluten-free matzah. We see the ingredients are gluten-free oat flour and water. So actually, none of these matzahs that we have looked at have leavening in them at all, but only some of them are kosher for Passover. Kosher for Passover matzah is defined as shmura. This comes from the verb shamor, which means to look, to watch, and that means that it is carefully guarded from the time it's planted, through the growing process, through the reaping process, and through the making of the matzah process. So when did this start that there is this special matzah? We read in Exodus, it just requires to be unleavened, which almost all these matzahs that we have looked at are unleavened. What is this shmurah, this watching? So from the 4th century, from the Talmud, Rabbi Abahu said that Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish said, according to the sages, leavening occurs in the time it takes a person to walk the distance from Migdal Nunaya to Tiberias, which is a meal 2,000 cubits. 2,000 cubits is about 3,000 feet, a bit over a half a mile. So further definition comes from the great Rabbi Rambam Maimonides from his Mishneh Torah. Most authorities define 18 minutes as the accepted period of time in which an average man would walk this distance. And actually, that seems pretty accurate. I would walk slowly on the treadmill for 1 mile, and it might take me a half hour. So if I'm going a little more than half a mile, 18 minutes might be reasonable. However, the Rambam quotes a more lenient figure, 24 minutes. The Shulchan Aruch and the Rama suggest hurrying the process of kneading and baking matzah because the heat generated by the working the dough may cause it to become leavened faster. Though each particular hesitation may be less than 18 minutes, the total of all hesitations may exceed that figure. So this is some kind of mythology that if wheat or other grain is exposed to water for 18 minutes, it begins to leaven. And I'm going to let you make your own experiment right now. You can pause the video and go mix up your matzah dough and leave it for 18 minutes. And you tell me if it leavens. Well, I'll tell you, it takes 2 or 3 days for the natural yeast in the air to leaven this kind of dough. So 18 minutes is beyond a stringent number. What happened to the people in the Exodus? Exodus 12:34. And the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading troughs being bound up, and their clothes upon their shoulders. 3 verses later, the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot, about 600,000 on foot that were men besides the children. I've seen various distances quoted for how far it is from Ramses to Sukkot. The smallest distance I saw was 8 miles. So even in that time, what happened? 1 verse later, and they baked unleavened cakes of the dough which they brought forth out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not tarry, neither had they prepared for themselves any victual. So after walking 8 miles, or maybe 120 miles, as is quoted in some places, the bread was still unleavened. Unleavened bread just means that it has no leaven in it, and that you haven't waited 2 or 3 days until it formed itself into a sourdough starter and began to raise. All the matzah that you see in the grocery store which just has wheat and water, is kosher for Passover. There is no biblical requirement for anything else. The requirement for it to be guarded, to be quickly made in 18 minutes, to clean all the machines in between every batch in case a little piece is left on there and it's begun to leaven. These are all rabbinical requirements, but you can make your own decision how you want to walk out the commandment for unleavened bread. I want to tell you one more interesting story about unleavened bread. The first place we see it is in Genesis 19:3. The angels have come to Lot's house to pull him out before the disaster falls. And it says, he pressed upon them greatly, and they turned in unto him. Remember, the angels were just going to sleep in the street. They weren't going to try and sleep in his house. But he demanded that they come in because he knew the nature of the people that he was living with. And so they entered the house, and he made him a feast, and he did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. This is the first matzah long before Exodus, but it tells you if you eat unleavened bread, you should be prepared to get up and run for your life. Shalom.